All right, welcome everyone. I think we can get started. Yes, you can all hear me well. So welcome to this online seminar or webinar about reviewing practice inspired research for journals and for conferences. So I welcome on behalf of Milena and Sarah as well, who are co-organizers of this session. We're organizing this is a collaboration actually between the Strategy as Practice interest group at AOM and at SMS. Yes. Yeah. All right. So this webinar has 3 parts. And before we start, be aware that the session is recorded for part 1 and part 2. And the video will be posted afterwards on YouTube, so you can also have a look afterwards. All right, so first part is by Matthias. He will present some insights on the what of reviewing. So why are we doing reviewing? You know, it's the cornerstone of our academic practice. So also some reflections on, you know, what are maybe some of the issues to consider when you're reviewing for conferences and journals when you're doing strategy as practice papers. And then in part 2, we will have Fannie and Ellen talk about some best practices. So very excited about you know, their participation and to hear about how they approach the practices of reviewing. So they're both best reviewers from last year's academy. So I'm sure we can learn a lot from their tips and tricks and implement them directly when we start reviewing for academy and SMS. All right, and then in part 3, we will do breakout rooms where we do small group reflections on the topic. So maybe you already have looked at your AOM reviews that you got from Matthias, and then we can discuss if you know you have some other questions. In the meantime, there's also time after each presentation for a couple of questions. So if you have questions, raise your hand or write in the chat. All right, so before I hand over, I just want to say thank you to today's speakers. Matthias, this is a very brief introduction. Matthias Wenzel is a professor at Leuphana University in Lüneburg in Germany. And he's also the program chair of the SAP interest group at Academy. Fannie is assistant professor at HEC Montréal in Canada. She does research on strategy as practice research on mainly grand challenges, and just published 2 really cool papers in ANJ. Really recommend. And then lastly, we have Ellen. I practiced pronouncing your last name right, Nathues, but I probably do it wrong. You can do it better. She's at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. And she also does research, practice and process research on practice of organizing, on communication in interorganizational settings. All right, without further ado, I now hand over to Matthias.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, first of all, to all the interested people who are increasingly being informed about reviewing. And I'm very happy about this tremendous interest in the session. So thank you very much to those who have organized it. Thank you very much to Ellen and Fannie for sharing their insights, because the main point that I would like to make here is that this is actually a very important part of our day-to-day work practice that we often underappreciate. So thank you very much for that reason. Also to at least the many of you who have also signed up to review, let's say for AOM or for SAP at other conferences such as SMS, or who also review for journals. And again, I will hopefully make a brief point about the importance of reviewing the type of work that we're producing as well as SAP scholars. So I would like to structure my point around 4 issues, namely the question, what is peer reviewing? And as you can already see, I'm using the gerund here to make clear that this is an activity as well as an, let's call it a skillful accomplishment that we should keep an eye on. Then I would like to contextualize peer reviewing a bit more across different settings in which we have different purposes as well as perhaps, let's say, different criteria for what to review. I would like to strengthen an argument around why to review in general, but perhaps in particular SAP work that should be reviewed, and fourth, some issues to look at when reviewing. And I will keep that point brief because this part I think raises a lot of questions, a lot of difficult questions that I will then leave to Ellen and Fannie, I guess. So, but let's start easy. And as I said, many of you have already signed up to review in one way or another. For that reason, I would like to keep that part, let's say, simple and rather direct. So by peer reviewing, I refer to the practice of giving feedback on scholarly work in the broadest sense. That obviously can happen in different ways. For example, we also give friendly reviews to our colleagues. So this is also a way of giving feedback on scholarly work. But peer reviewing differs in this regard. It differs because this type of feedback is often given blind or in an anonymous way, as we also call it. It is ideally given by experts in the field who know a lot about what that type of scholarly work is about. And this is because we want this type of we want these peer reviews because they help authors improve their work, their insights, their reflections, their conclusions, as in that sense a matter of knowledge progress that can ideally happen then based on expert knowledge that helps us reflect on our own, let's say, procedures and conclusions in greater in-depth ways. So what we typically look out for is the strengths and weaknesses of certain manuscripts, but most likely also suggestions, right? Suggestions for how to improve scholarly works. In that sense, it's ideally constructive. So that type of constructiveness or constructive feedback, I think, is kind of an overarching concern of peer reviewing, but we find peer reviewing in different contexts. For example, we might be asked to review proposals of submissions to conferences, right? So proposals might include just 1,000 words. Abstracts submitted to conferences can be as short as 500 words, for example. But some of you might also have been asked to review manuscripts that have been submitted to conferences. And these are then full-length submissions, right? So, for example, to AOM, 40 pages. And sometimes you might also be invited to review for journals. Then you also get to review manuscripts for journals. And as you can see across those different contexts, there are a lot of similarities. Overall, it's about improving scholarly work, improving writing, improving methodological issues, and so on. However, there are also notable differences. So whenever authors submit proposals, they might also be interested in improving their work, obviously, but within just a limited amount of words can only kind of foreshadow what you would like to do in a full paper. It's not a full paper yet. So in that sense, it's a good way for authors to test their ideas and see whether they stick, whether they resonate. And for that reason, for a reviewer, it might be weird or at least odd to assume that this is a full paper that is reviewed, right? And use the entire repertoire of criteria that you would typically use to review a full paper. So here it would rather be about reflections on interestingness, relevance of the ideas that are being tested, the potential, whether this could be an interesting paper, and if it's a conference, it could also be a matter of conference fit. Does it really fit to the conference to which it is submitted, or to the interest group to which it is submitted, and so on. And then you always at least typically see reviewer recommendations for those abstracts and proposals relating to the acceptance or rejection for presentation. Then if we move to manuscript submissions to conferences, then full manuscripts are typically submitted, and authors might then have in mind not only to improve their work, but also to test the robustness, right? To just test how reviewers would respond to their manuscript if they submit it elsewhere, and see what might still be unclear, what has to be improved, and so on. So here the reviewer's focus might be to look at also interestingness, the relevance, but also the robustness in many ways. Are the theoretical conclusions robust? Are they defendable? Are the methodological procedures robust? Are they defendable? And then also, does the manuscript fit to the conferences, or in particular to the interest group or division to which it has been submitted? And then the reviewer recommendation would also be to accept or reject the paper for presentation. And then finally, if papers are submitted to journals, it is also then a matter of improving one's work. Obviously, you also get feedback and see what expert reviewers respond and how it can be improved. But it's not just that. It's also about quality assurance, because what is at stake here is whether the paper gets published or not, right? So the recommendation is a very different one, namely acceptance or rejection for publication. In that sense, it's also clear that reviewing matters. Reviewing is consequential as a, let's say, practice, as a skillful accomplishment that culminates in certain recommendations for decisions that editors, that program chairs, and so on have to make. Although, and what we can also see here from that overview, the criteria and the focus of what to review, what to look out for might actually differ. But let's elaborate the consequentiality of reviewing a bit more by finding some reasons for why we should review in general, and why we should also review for strategy as practice in particular. And just as a case in point, I would like to draw an illustration here, from the Academy of Management. The Academy of Management, on their call for reviewers, highlights reasons to review for different scholars at different career stages. And just in a nutshell, what AOM suggests is that reviewing is important to get involved with the scholarly community, to ensure academic quality, to explore recent research, to gain insights into the scholarly process, and to be or to become an engaged community member. And nothing against these reasons. I think these are all good reasons, right, to review. However, one might also argue that they're rather generic, so they're not very specific. So why to review in particular? And part, they might also be quite self-interested, right? I mean, obviously, each and every one of us might be interested in what certain scholars within the community are currently doing, and there's nothing wrong against that. But we can actually expand the scope of these reasons a bit more. So we look at Trevino's arguments. Trevino argued that reviewing is actually a professional responsibility. So there is a certain moral, a certain ethical commitment on our behalf to do so. And more recently, Lindebaum and Jordan have argued that reviewing is a quid pro quo commitment. And just to illustrate what this means, each and every one of us has to have in mind that every time we submit a paper or manuscript to journal to conferences, or an abstract or a proposal to a conference, we also invoke reviewer efforts, right? It's always or typically reviewed by 2 or 3 people, which means that in the sense of a quid pro quo commitment, we should actually review 2 or 3 times the amount of papers and proposals that we submit, because only then can we actually match the numbers of reviewers with submissions at this point. And this, I think, is also quite interesting point to keep in mind. But let's go further, and let's perhaps also go beyond the numbers and look more deeply into why it is important. And I would like to do this based on the classical distinction advanced by Habermas between research and practice as knowledge domains. So from that perspective, one could say that research is the world of what Cornelissen et al. Called informed knowledge claims, typically based on certain procedures that scholars scholarly communities considered rigorous, whatever that means. And then on the other side, we see practice as the world of lived experiences often erroneously considered imaginary, undecided, and indefinite. And by the word erroneous, you already see that this distinction between research and practice is absolutely not clear cut. It's a distinction that it cannot be held as such, because research it's also based on pre-scientific insights, just as much as practitioners are able to use systematic procedures to arrive at certain conclusions. So this is not the point, but there's one important difference between the worlds of research and practice, and this is the process of peer reviewing. This is, I would argue, rather unique to the academic knowledge production, let's say, as a matter of improving scholarly work, as we said, and as a matter of assuring the quality of our work. And for that reason, what I'm arguing here is that, similar to Dobush et al., no peer review, no point, that peer reviewing is actually constitutive of academic knowledge, and in that sense also of our identity as researchers. So could also say the other way around. Every time we decline an invitation to review, we contribute to undermining the production of academic knowledge and our identity as researchers a bit more. For that reason, it's super important for each and every one of us to be engaged as a reviewer every time, especially when we get asked to review. But let's make this a bit more precise here. I just said research is the world of informed knowledge claims based on procedures that scholarly communities consider rigorous. And this is because scholarly communities actually have different standards for what counts as rigorous for them. And if we consider SAP a scholarly community, then peer reviewing is also constitutive of SAP's identity as a scholarly community, right? I mean, if we don't review SAP-related work, who will do it, and based on whose standards? So to repeat that claim that I just made with a more specific twist around SAP, every time we decline requests to review SAP-related work, we also contribute to undermining the identity of SAP as a scholarly community a bit more, because someone else will then review SAP work, and again, perhaps based on different standards than those that count for SAP. For that reason, the argument that I'm making here is that it's really, really important for each and every one of us to be reviewers, to be active reviewers, and to not just consider this a side task of our day-to-day academic lives, but as a crucial task for each and every one of us. And then finally, and I will keep this part very short, as I said, I'm sure that especially Ellen and Fannie will tell us much more about that, what to review. And again, for illustrative purposes, I'm drawing here on the categories that are provided on the AOM platform. Once you enter your reviews there, what is typical there is to make statements about theoretical contribution and positioning, about methodological rigor, the soundness and transparency of one's analysis, clarity of writing, presentation, the relevance, the what, why should we care, and lastly, this is the only point that I might elaborate a bit more, is the paper of relevance to SAP. Just to remind us, strategizing activities and practices is a very broad church, and SAP is more than just strategy research in the narrow sense. So SAP is very open to different approaches, different areas that are practice theoretically interested and informed. So it doesn't really necessarily have to be a classical strategy paper with a practice twist. So for that reason, just to keep that in mind, that SAP is more than that. But without further ado, I would like to stop here at this point and also be able to hopefully answer some questions, and again, leave the more difficult questions to Ellen and Fannie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matthias, for the great overview. Any questions? No, otherwise I suggest we move on and hear from Ellen. Fannie, sorry, or Ellen? Who's
I don't
ready?
mind. Ellen, do you want to go first, or?
I absolutely don't mind. Whatever you
Okay.
like.
I actually have a question for Matthias.
Go ahead.
What does not fit in SAP as a paper? Do you have any examples?
So one example would be, let's say, practical work that misunderstands the P of SAP as not theoretical, but purely practical. I mean, we're all interested in practical implications, but if it's a paper that wouldn't, let's say, go to another division or interest group at AOM because it doesn't have any theoretical contributions, but only practical implications, then this wouldn't count as SAP, let's say, just as an example.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So I'll jump in. I don't have slides. I'll just babble for 8 minutes and then I'll pass it on to Ellen. Thank you so much, Matthias, and thank you for all the hard work you do for the SAP community. Round of applause for him. Well done. Because he's amazing. And thanks for inviting me as well. I have a couple of caveats. The first one is that I'm a very green reviewer, at least that's how I feel. So I do have a little bit of an imposter syndrome here. I've been reviewing for the SAP community for the Academy since I started my PhD. So since 2017, but I've just recently starting reviewing for academic journals. And so, yeah, so everything I say, take with a grain of salt. I'm here to learn as much as to share my experience. The second caveat for me is that I was really, really lucky to be trained by 3 strategy as practice scholars, Jane Lay, Paula Jarzbakowski, and Charlotte Cloutier. And so everything I say is pretty much me speaking their truth about reviewing, because I really trust these women with my life when it comes to advice in terms of everything academic related. So yeah, so I had three questions to answer. I think the first one was, if you get a review, what do you do? How do you proceed? So I'll just run through what I do, and Ellen, you can jump in and say, no, this is crap or whatever. So whenever I get a review, whether it's for the Academy or journal article, I'll start with the abstract, check the models and the tables. That's the first thing I do, just to give me an understanding of the context of what are the keywords, the key signals in terms of academic conversation. Am I comfortable in the theories that are being proposed and stuff like that? Then I'm a very linear person, so I will read each section one at a time and make comments for each section. So front end, methods, findings, contribution. So I'll give, I'll have like a Word document next to the article, and I'll just put some key points on any kind of thing that's unclear for me, anything that I think could be improved, anything that is kind of a red flag. And then I give it 5 minutes. So I just let it sit. I don't know. I feel like I tend sometimes to go too quickly and to pose a judgment on new ideas, and good papers usually push the boundaries. And so it's important, at least for me, to let it sit a while and to ponder on it. And then I have a second read, which is more the big picture. So I've looked at each section, and then I have a second read, which is really about the flow, the red thread, the coherence, the contradictions, any kind of thing that I see that is not fitting, or there's some misalignment in all of those sections. So first read is very thorough in terms of the sections. So I look at it from a very analytical perspective. And then second is more holistic, and I look at the whole picture. If it's an R&R, I'll read the replies of the other reviewers first, because I'm very, very curious to see what they had to say about the paper. highlight anything that I see as a good point that the reviewers might have flagged that I didn't see in my analysis, especially comments that I didn't spot, like really stuff that I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually really important. So I'll try to embed that, or at least signal in my response letter that these should be addressed as well. And I tried to look at the manuscript with a fresh pair of eyes. So I don't know if this is good practice, but I don't read the former manuscript. I try to really look at it from, okay, this is an entirely new body of work. I read it and I apply exactly the same method as I did before. So I look at all the sections, then I have a holistic view. I write my review letter, and then I read the former manuscript to see if there's anything else that I've missed, anything that was better in the former version that could be transferred to this one, things that I see that have been improved. I adjust my letter, I let it sit again, and then I send it after a while. So that's usually the other iterations for R&Rs. Now, how do you give constructive feedback? My philosophy is the NASA philosophy is I work the problem. So for me, as a reviewer, I'm part of a team that includes the authors, and I'm here to work the problem with them, to find solutions. I'm not against them. I'm not against their ideas. I'm just trying to bring this paper forward with them. So this is really my philosophy. And I think that's because also I'm an early scholar, so I don't feel very comfortable saying this is crap, you shouldn't do this. Like I tend to be very I don't know, very holistic. Well, I guess nice in my comments. I think you were saying this ideally constructive feedback, so I ideally try to be very, very nice in the way I present the stuff, the feedback. The other thing is I try to be very precise in what I say. Having been in situations where I was banging my head on my desk, saying like, what is this reviewer trying to tell me? I do not understand. So I try to be as precise as I can, avoid any kind of the proverbial, statements like so what, or breadth versus depth, or show versus tell, or all of those kinds of jargon that we have to say that something's incomplete. And I try to give examples of what I mean by that, so that it's very clear what I mean. And I always try to give constructive suggestions. So if there is a dilemma, and I think it's a very important dilemma, I do try to take some time to open avenues, give it a little bit of a hand, like saying, oh, maybe you could go there, maybe you could go there. And I always bracket that saying, these are suggestions, but it's just so you don't feel like I'm just, banging you on the head and not actually providing anything helpful to get you out of there. Then I do flag deal breakers, and that's something that Jane has told me, is that you need to be clear to your editors what is a deal breaker for you versus what is an annoyance in terms of feedback. And so I do structure my letters in a way that, even though I do per section, I'll flip that in order of importance, and I say it at the beginning. I'm like, this is in order of importance what I think should be addressed in your paper. So the first one is really something usually that I think absolutely needs to be addressed to bring the paper forward. So I do spend a lot of time on what I call deal breakers or red flags. The minor points I usually put at the end, like, oh, check this reference, I don't think you cite it right, and stuff like that. Is just, for me, this is more, you're going to do this in an afternoon versus the first paragraph is probably going to take you a little bit more time to address. So anything that is weakening the argument, anything that is really not positioning the paper well, anything that really is going to stop them from entering any kind of reviewing process if they're at the conference level, or move to a second R&R. So that I spend a lot of time on. And then I check myself for anything that is too pedantic. I don't know if you guys do that. Because you can get, like, we're academics, we're nitpicking, and we like precise vocabulary, but at some point I'm like, we're 3 people going through this paper. I need to be careful that I'm not going too far into the whole, I'll check this sentence or whatever. So I do try to avoid any kind of pedantic comments. And I think my challenge at this point, and this is an extra little thing that I put in there, my challenge is really to make sure that I tailor my reviewing to the targeted outlet. So like I always do, I do the max always. So I try to give everything I have for any kind of submission, whether it is for a conference or a journal. But I realized that, the identity of a journal is important. So, what are they looking for and how far do they want to go? For instance, in terms of methodology explanation. So I would like, a submission to be extremely thorough about this, but some journals are maybe not as, I guess, rigorous in that regard. So, but that I don't really know how to do. So if you have any suggestions about that. And then, yeah, I think the other challenge is really to give it 5 minutes. It's very easy to resist ideas. So, and to be frustrated when it's not going in the direction that you would like it to go. But I try to do it as much as possible. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Fannie. I made a lot of notes, lots of good stuff. Any questions before? Otherwise, I'll ask a question. So you mentioned a little bit like how you structure your review. So you start with the main points and then you give it like a structure, or could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, because that's more on the writing style. Also, there's something to do about how do you organize your thoughts. You could also, for example, do it, introduction, methods, stuff like that. But you go from most important to
yeah, that's a great point. So my first read through the paper, I'll literally have abstract, introduction, methods, findings, contribution, model, any kind of evidence table or stuff like that. So that's what I would call the analytic I guess first review. And then I have the more holistic review, which is I look at this, I step back and I'm like, okay, what is important here? And so, those sections will get all intermingled, because obviously a concept that you flag in the front end might be speaking to your findings. And so I'll completely destroy all this beautiful structure that I've made in my mind, and then structure it in a way that's going to help the editor and the reader and the author the best, which is from most important to address to minor points. Yeah,
I guess that makes sense also because a lot of these issues are kind of related.
Yep.
Yeah, Matthias, you had a question or comment?
So my question would relate to scheduling. So Fannie, the way you nicely describe it is to demonstrate how effortful and how time consuming it is to do a good review. And as I said, I mean, it's, for many of us, it's actually a side task amongst many other commitments. So when do you do this? Like, do you schedule a certain time block in their calendar to do this, or do you do this, I don't know, in the morning and at night, whenever there might be less to do, or on the weekends? I don't know. When do you do this?
So I have 2 young kids. One is 3.5, and the other one just turned 2. So evenings and weekends are not, they're not, there's stuff to do. There's baths to be taken and diapers to be changed. So I don't really have time in those periods I just block a time during the day. So this is so I feel a bit bad right now, Matthias, because this is the first year since my PhD that I haven't reviewed for the SAP. I'm so sorry, but but usually whenever the SAP reviewing season starts, I'll just make sure that I block some time off. So usually it's a day per paper approximately, and I have been asked to do emergency reviews as well for SAP. So that's an extra 3 papers. That's 6 days total blocked for this. So yeah, it's not, at least for me, it's not a quick task that you can do on the plane. But maybe eventually when you get senior, these muscles are just really well developed. Not for me, at least, not now.
Of time, I want to hand over to Ellen, and then we can have more questions at the end.
Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the organizing team, and thanks Fannie and Matthias for the very nice intro. Now I do have to kind of keep up with everything you've been saying. Maybe to kind of also start with some caveat on my side. I'm just as green to reviewing, I believe, as Fannie. I've been reviewing for quite a few journals, but I'm also still at the very start of my academic career. So I did a PhD and a postdoc, and I just recently started as an assistant professor. So I've kind of been, doing the reviews throughout that entire career journey, which I find has been enormously helpful. So I would also always encourage everyone to start as early as possible, maybe with the help of a mentor or someone to give feedback, just to get into the practice and the craft that reviewing really is. So I feel like the more you do it, the better you become. So that's maybe just kind of to begin with. We got these two questions. I got the same questions as Fannie did. And maybe just to begin with, so that's some notes that came to my mind thinking about these questions. I think I take a bit more of an intuitive approach to reviewing, or at least to reading a paper in the first round than Fannie does. And maybe relating that back to Matthias' question, for me it works best to block a time for that, either in the weekend or very early in the morning, when my brain is not yet messed up with all the everyday hectic and administrative to-dos, and when it feels like a burdenous task, but something rather that I can look forward to with a nice cup of coffee. And often I like to print it, speaking very practically, and just write down everything that comes into my mind. That can be a strength, a weakness, a question. But I'm on the lookout particularly are these glowy moments. What we sometimes experience as authors when we read another paper where we feel like, oh wow, this is such a cool concept, this really resonates with me, this speaks to me. I would tend like to put a star or some sort of highlighting color just to know, hey, this is something that really makes this manuscript or this idea very magical and very outstanding. Can we not do more with that? So for me, that's kind of what I look for. But also, what are the questions that arise, the puzzles, the unclarities. But I tend to go very intuitive in that regard without a clear structure, just trying to absorb everything that's in the manuscript and trying to get the vibe of the paper and the ideas that the authors are trying to convey. Does it work? Yeah, here we are. And then afterwards, I also agree with Fannie that you need to let it sit for a bit and let it sink in for a bit, and I become more structured then. So I think I move from messy and intuitive to more structured as I kind of go from reading a paper to writing a review. And often, I tend to be very overwhelmed because lots of ideas are in a paper. There's, certainly with qualitative ethnographic data or other rich storylines that we often have in SAP, there's so many storylines to tell. And what I often then kind of try to map out or maybe even draw or sketch out is, hey, so what are the lines this paper is kind of sketching and where do they intersect? And also which ones do maybe double up or kind of go in different directions. And then, it depends a bit on how I judge the maturity of the manuscript and whether I would say, hey, I see 3 lines moving forward and I advise you to go with line A, or whether I would leave that completely open to the authors. But that always really depends on, how I feel, whether one storyline is very clear or, whether it's really a little all over the place. But I'd like to think of it, we are here at that crossing right now, and where can the journey with the paper take us next? And then kind of restructure my entire review and my entire thoughts around this path line. So say, I find concept A very, very relevant for a paper. How would a storyline that is much more strongly framed to concept A look like, and what would need to be done about that? I also look for kind of, fixable things versus fatal things. So deal breakers, as Fannie just mentioned them. So what are things that really, really need changing? Otherwise it's a no-go just because it's a big red flag. I think that can sometimes be harsh, but it really just helps for clarity and gives authors some clear guidance on, hey, so this is really deserving our attention and needs to be done. What should change and what should remain? Very often in my experience also of receiving reviews, it's all about change this, change that, blah, 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 do all of that, which can again be very overwhelming. But there are these great moments in every paper as well. So, you know, what are those moments that we can also keep? And then how can we move them forward and improve? That's something I've kind of like to, you know, structure along. And then finally some minor aspects. But for me, certainly if I read a manuscript in the first round, less, you know, after an hour, it's about, you know, what's the story, what's the pathway, and which one to take, you know, in a more clearer fashion as we proceed with this paper. Very much approaching this entire process as a process, so product that's in the making and being shaped by everyone involved, you know, whether that's the authors or the reviewers or the editors. It might also sometimes then help me to kind of, you know, go through by sections, so very similar to what Fannie did, but then keeping in mind the pathway that I kind of had in front of me before, or the 2 or 3 that I had before. Say, you know, if pathway A is the one that I kind of feel like would help the manuscript the most, how could the introduction be more focused, more problematized, and why so? Same for the theoretical framework. I always prefer narrow and deeper, but how, you know, can this pathway be kind of pulled through the entire manuscript? That for me is a good way to kind of restructure or structure a review. And then before I really write it, you know, I structure it, so I bullet it and move from this whole kind of messy intuitive thinking and everything that caught my attention to, hey, okay, so this is kind of what I understand from the paper. I see 3 paths moving forward. In the following, I'm going to outline, you know, how going that path could look like, and then maybe go section by section, kind of like that. But so that we have like a journey to travel together really as the paper moves forward. And then constructive feedback, the second question we received. I try to work with the authors and the ideas, not against them, and trying to make it not about me. So not about my preferences and likings, but really trying to get their idea first. So be open-minded, not because, you know, I dislike a theory in the past, maybe, you know, I still need to dislike it. Maybe they bring it in a very fresh light. So I do, and that's very difficult, I find. So any kind of tips on that is much appreciated, but I try to be aware of my own biases, kind of, or my own, you know, assumptions and preferences, these sorts of things, and leave them aside as much as possible. While, you know, being critical and a coach, you know, again, with the idea of helping to move forward, not a co-author. So I'm also very aware that what I think, you know, maybe are the great idea for a manuscript is not maybe what the author had in mind. And that's also never, you know, what my role should be. That's why I'd like to, you know, outline possible pathways and not, you know, this is what you have to do, but leave the choice with them eventually. You can just kind of give your reading interpretation of a particular paper and some ideas, but do not overimpose. I think that's very important. Yeah, strengths and weaknesses. So yes, how to manage the weaknesses, very important, but also, you know, what can we do more with the strengths? My feeling often is, yes, we do need to get rid of weaknesses and overcome them, these sorts of things. But much in the quality and the contributions of a journal is to be gained in seizing the strengths that are often already there in the very first round, maybe just not yet carved out enough. Not just feedback, but feed forward. Again, this kind of journey idea. So what are the pathways we can take together? Leave a choice to the authors. Bit of tone, be sharp and honest, but not brutally honest. So yes, you can be critical. Yes, you can be constructive and concrete. I think it all goes together really. And there are these typical phrases that I always for a very long time thought of, you know, this is written in a very constructive spirit, blah, 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 you know, please take my comments in that. But I very often thought for a long, yeah, it's just empty phrases or empty signifiers. I do have come to like them as an author on the receiving end, so to say, just, you know, to see how there's someone caring and actually engaging, and this is kind of how I should take it. So I would always say include them. And this also is the point, you know, there's a person at the receiving end, so be tactful. Certainly, you know, as a PhD student, reflecting back on that time, what you write is very closely entangled with, you know, who you are as a person and your whole identity as a scholar. It's very easy to forget that if you do an anonymous review. So keep this in mind that there's someone new that's very, very, you know, strongly related to that work on the other hand of the receiving. Write like a conversation. So, you know, take a dialogue, you want to ask questions. I think that's one of the points I have as well. And not just say this is to be done, this is to be done, but maybe also get the authors thinking in different ways by raising questions, raising possibilities. Matthias named a suggestion. I was kind of typing while you were speaking. And maybe before I go on too long, I think it's very important. What I always do, is I write it and then I rewrite it to be kinder. Because, you know, it's very easy to kind of in the first way, you just go, okay, this needs to be done and that and that and that. And then I kind of approach it again, I leave it aside for a bit and just see, okay, how can I put the same message in little kinder words, just also to make sure the motivation is still up. Matthias said reviewing matters in decisions. Yes, I also think it matters in the process of moving forward. So I think what that means for us as reviewers is that we should care, because, you know, it makes a whole difference for those writing a paper. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you very much. I just took some final comments, but I want to address now. So first of all, thank you very much from our side that you took the time not only to review our papers, but to prepare to review our papers from the AOM and hopefully also SMS SAP section. So thank you very much for being with us here today. And if you have any further questions or things that come in your mind only after the session, please feel always free to contact us again. So what can I say about the session? I found it very interesting, very intriguing. I took so many notes. So thank you so much, Fannie, and thank you so much, Ellen, for being with us here today. It was really insightful. So I think some of the most important insight that I took with me is that reviewing is very important for us also as an identity, as a researcher, right? Sometimes we tend to think, you know, we do not have time for that. We have so many responsibilities, be it writing our own papers, but really seeing it as part of our identity. I think it's a really good way forward. And also think about this in the following way. You learn also through reviewing, right? I think it was Annie who said it, start early with reviewing. Just because you're a PhD student doesn't mean you can't review. Because when you start reviewing, you also get to know what is out there. So be very selective about your keywords, and then you get to know also your field, right? You get to know what other people are doing. You get to know more recent research. You can look into the literature section, so you know what else is out there. And also very important, once you start reviewing, you also learn how to think like a reviewer. So this will also benefit you later on for your own research. So I can also only echo what also other people already said. Start with reviewing early. I think it will be of great help also for your own research. Then maybe coming to the different reviewing techniques. So we learned a lot. Take your time. I know reviewing is very time consuming, but I think it's only fair because we know that there are human beings behind the papers, and this is often forgotten, right? They also took so much time writing the papers. So then as a reviewer, you might also want to take the time and read it properly. So I really like the ideas about deal breakers, communicate not only very clearly to the authors, but also to the editors, and just communicate what you see as deal breakers and what needs to be addressed. Think about the gold nuggets. I think it's also a nice term, and that I hear also myself as an author. So what is the nugget? So really think about what is the golden pinch that you want to find out, what is the most intriguing thing, and you as a reviewer could help you there. Constructive feedback is very important, not only for journals, but both for the AOM and for the SAP. So sometimes I heard about authors, luckily not with AOM and SMS, but I heard from authors saying, for example, that they got feedback like from reviewers, I pity the tree that had to be cut down for printing out your manuscript. You don't want to do that as a reviewer, right? So you want to be constructive, you offer suggestions for improvement. So very important, as Ellen said, you don't want to be the co-author, but you at least want to have constructive feedback and provide suggestions for improvement. So I think my final statement would be think about also the authors behind it. And, it is anonymous reviewing, but be aware that there are also colleagues out there and whose careers also depend partly on that paper. So you want to help them as well to develop further. So that would be it for myself, maybe one important further side. So you already registered hopefully for the AOM, for the reviewing. The SMS deadline is also approaching quickly, so please feel free to submit your papers and to our SAP community there, but also we would be very glad if you could register as well there as a reviewer. But then you're already done with the AOM review, so I guess you can have more time than new time for conducting the SMS reviews. So again, if you have any questions, please always free to come back to me or to any of us. And yeah, I would hand back to our moderator or whether there are any final announcements to make.
Thank you so much. Actually, I have nothing to add to that. I think it was a great wrap up. So thanks everyone, especially Matthias, Fannie and Ellen, and also to all of the participants for a nice discussion and great questions.